Okay, today we're going to start the file for GameOfLife. This is going to take a few weeks to complete, but we're going to start it in baby steps. This is some programming. A lot of students really hate programming. I've tried various programs, and this one, at least they follow a little bit more than they did some of the others. I had them actually program one out of your engineering textbook for a long time, and it just got so complex that I don't think anyone even followed it. So here I've simply put out the rules. This is the first introduction worksheet. Then I started a small grids worksheet. So please place things in the same place as I do. Again, that's not magical. The size isn't magical, but that way your code will match and I won't be answering questions and giving 6 different answers because people have different size grids in different locations and then everyone's totally confused. So put in this information, make these grids. All of these individual grids, I have the information centered in bold, and you'll see I have out darker lines around there just to make them easier to see. Now we want a button. So go to the Insert. If you don't have the Developer tab, go to File, Options, Customize Ribbon, and make sure Developer is checked. On your home computers, Developer will remain there. Here on campus, each time you log in, you'll probably have to redo that step. Also, be sure and save this as a macro-enabled file. So you'll see the Excel macro-enabled. If you do not do that, after you've done with this first lesson and you say save and yes, you'll come back and all your code will be gone and you'll have to start over. So you want to be sure and save it as a macro-enabled to wherever you're saving your files. Now we're ready to do a button. So click on Insert, and click on this little icon here. You'll see my hint for a button, and now it's waiting for me to put this in. So I'm going to call this Button Start Life and say New. Reference isn't valid. What did I do wrong in there? Assign macro, Button Start Life, small grid. I'm wondering if I don't have something open that already has it in there, so I'm going to say new on that one. And yes, that is what happened. So now I'll bring this over and you can see what I have here. That's where we're going to do the code. However, before we do that code, we actually want to do some random code in here first. So you'll see this is module 1. I'm going to do an insert module and get module 2, and I'm putting in my random generator code. So this is where I'm saying it has to be a number, either 0 or 1, because that's what I want for life is going to be 1, no life is going to be 0. Now with this one, and if your properties one isn't here, simply come to view and say properties window, and then you can come in here and resize these however you need them to be. But our module 2 is going to be our globals. We try to discourage globals as much as possible. And in all sincerity, function is not necessarily, it wouldn't really be a global, but it's because we're going to be using this in the full-size grid too, so you don't have to keep looking for it, seeing where it's at, double-checking what you named it, etc. So I'm going to let you put it in the globals. And then we're going to come back to this one, this Start Life Small Grid, and let's rename that one Small Grid. And I'm going to say WS for worksheet, WS. Just so I can keep it straight. Again, if we chunk up the code, then when you have problems, it's easier for you to find it. It's easier for me when you start looking for all that information. Then we're going to come in here, and you're going to type this code. Let me make this bigger. The ones with the apostrophe at the beginning, that makes it turn green. That means it's a comment. The computer ignores what's in there, but it's nice to have it in there so you know what's going on. So this right here, I say dim is for dimension or create. So this is where I'm creating these variable names as integers. Again, what I call these variable names doesn't matter as long as I follow all the naming conventions. But if you name yours the same as mine, it's going to be easier to follow my code. In other words, you could have just said X and Y or R and C, and it still would have worked. The other thing here, I have this small grids in quotes multiple times here. Make sure that's exactly what yours is named over here, small grids. Otherwise, you're going to have some more problems. Or you could just say sheet 2, because that's, again, if your sheet 2 is the small grids. And you're going to put all this in here. I'm doing this one column at a time. Ultimately, you'll learn how to nest these loops so we can do row and column, but I'm starting, again, like I said earlier, baby steps. So I'm doing column C, then column D, column E, column F. We do go in, when we do range in Visual Basic, and I'll just type that in here, but you don't want it in here, but just so I can show you. Well, actually, never mind, I did right here. When we do range, we do it just like we're used to seeing it in Excel, B6 through F11. But when we're filling individual cells, the row comes first, then the column, and the column is no longer a letter, it is a number. So it gets a little bit confusing, but that's what you're doing. So when you get this typed in, you'll see that it says call fill random. Fill random is the sub that we have to create. So when we created the new macro, it did the button start life and the end sub. But this time it's not going to a single button, so we create the entire thing. All the blue are reserved words. This is what we're sending it, the R and the C. The order does matter. I have to make sure I send it in the order that I'm receiving it. And so here we're saying for row equals 6 to 11, which is our rows over here, 6 to 11. Let's go back. Then you're giving it random life. You're calling that random number generator, which we built over here. And it's returning either a 0 or 1. So we're saying if it's a 1, give it life. Otherwise, give it nothing. So put all of that information in there. Then come back here and let's see if it works. And it does work. It randomly fills life. It keeps it in the grid. I don't have any outside the grid. That's exactly what I want. So now let's come in here and right click on this and edit the text. And let's say what it's doing here. Click here to clear grids and give random life to current life grid. You don't have to do that exactly, but give it something, a meaningful text that tells us exactly what's going on. So now we're ready to start counting the neighbors, but before we do that, I want to talk about it a little bit. So we want to do it so that there's always this is always a cell in the middle, which has 8 cells around it. So we're actually going to use these border cells for each one of these individually as we get to them. So we have to make sure there's nothing in these cells and you can't enter anything in there. Otherwise, we'd have to do a lot more code because we'd have to deal that this one really only has 3 neighbors. This one only has 3, but these in here have 8. We want to make it consistent. We also want to do this in nested loops. So let's create a new worksheet and rename this, loops or something. Again, what you name it isn't so important, but again, when we're in the Visual Basic, you have to match your name. So in here, we're going to insert a button. And the first thing we want to do is clear all the information that's in here. So let's do a button, clear loops, and say new. So it put it here inside this small grids one. There's nothing wrong with it in there, but again, like I said, if we have a module for each individual worksheet, it's probably going to make our life easier. So I'm cutting it from here. I'm not deleting it, and I'm starting insert a new module, and I'm putting it in here. And then I'm going to come down to this sheet 1, and I'm going to rename that one to loops. Okay, do not use just loop, as that is a reserved word. So now I have globals, loops, and small grids. And all we need in this one, and we want to clear the whole worksheet in here. So in this one, we are going to make this quite simple. We're going to say, and I hit tab to indent that. Again, that's not mandatory, but it is good coding practice. And if you're in regular Visual Basic and a lot of other programs, it would code it for you. So here, again, match yours exactly, not mine, and then do this. And that's all we need to clear it. So let's come back here to our spreadsheet, and we could just randomly fill in some stuff here. And then when I click on button 1, I'll see that it did clear it. So let's change the text on this one, and let's make it something that says clear worksheet or whatever makes sense to you. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this particular video right here, but we do have a lot more to do, and I will start it in a little bit.